The tent stood finished at the center of the camp. Its curtains were stretched and pinned, its coverings of ram skin and fine linen drawn tight over the frames of acacia wood, and above it, low and heavy, the cloud had come down. It settled so thick upon the tent that the light inside was swallowed, and Moses, who had walked up a burning mountain and come back alive, stood at the doorway and could not go in. The whole camp was quiet. The people who had watched Sinai smoke and shake still carried the smell of it in their memory, still remembered the sound, like a trumpet growing louder and louder until they begged it to stop. Now the fire that had lived on the mountain lived here, in cloth and wood, in the middle of where they slept and ate and raised their children. And out of that cloud, out of the tent no man could enter, a voice called him by name. It did not begin with thunder. It began with instructions. When any man among you brings an offering to the Lord, the voice said, let him bring it from the herd or from the flock. And so the first thing the people would learn, standing so near to holiness, was what to do with blood. If a man brought a burnt offering from the herd, it was to be a male without blemish, and he was to bring it to the door of the tent of his own will. He would lay his hand upon the head of the animal, pressing down, and in that touch the beast became his life set upon its life, and it would be accepted for him, to cover him. Then he killed it there before the Lord, and the sons of Aaron, the priests, caught the blood and threw it against the altar all around. The animal was flayed and cut into its pieces. The priests laid fire on the altar and arranged the wood, and upon the wood they laid the head, the pieces, the fat. The inner parts and the legs were washed with water, and the whole of it was burned upon the altar, all of it, nothing kept back, a burnt offering, an offering made by fire, a smell that pleased the Lord. If the offering came from the flock, from the sheep or the goats, it was the same, a male without blemish, killed on the north side of the altar, its blood thrown against the sides, its body cut and washed and burned entire. And if a man was poor and could bring only a bird, then he brought a turtle dove or a young pigeon. The priest wrung off its head and burned it, and drained its blood down the side of the altar, and pulled away its crop and feathers and cast them beside the altar where the ashes were thrown, and split the bird by its wings without dividing it, and burned it. Even the smallest offering from the poorest hands rose in the same smoke and was accepted the same way. Then the voice spoke of the grain. When a man brought an offering of fine flour, he poured oil upon it and laid frankincense on it and carried it to the priests. The priest took a handful of the flour and the oil, with all the frankincense, and burned that handful on the altar as a memorial, and the rest belonged to Aaron and his sons, a thing most holy of the offerings made by fire. Whether it was baked in the oven or cooked on a griddle or fried in a pan, it was to be unleavened, broken in pieces, oil poured over it. No grain offering was to be made with leaven, and no leaven and no honey were ever to be burned to the Lord. But salt, the salt of the covenant, was never to be left out. With every offering, salt. And when a man brought his peace offering, his fellowship offering, whether from the herd or the flock, male or female, without blemish, he laid his hand on its head and killed it at the door, and the priests threw the blood against the altar. But of this offering the fat was given to the fire, the fat that covers the inner parts, the 2 kidneys and the fat upon them, the covering of the liver, all of it lifted away and burned as a pleasing smell. And the Lord set down a law that would run through everything that followed, spoken here and not to be forgotten. You shall eat neither fat nor blood. It is a perpetual statute through all your generations, in all your dwellings. The fat is the Lord's, the blood is the Lord's. But not every sin is a thing a man chooses with open eyes. And so the voice turned to the sins done without knowing, the wrong done by a hand that did not mean it, discovered only later, when the weight of it settles in. If the anointed priest himself sinned, and brought guilt upon the people, he was to bring a young bull without blemish, lay his hand on its head and kill it before the Lord. He carried its blood into the tent and dipped his finger and sprinkled it 7 times before the veil, and put some on the horns of the altar of incense, and poured the rest out at the base of the altar of burnt offering. The fat was burned, but the rest of the bull, its hide, its flesh, its head and legs, its inner parts and dung, the whole animal, was carried outside the camp to a clean place, to the ash heap, and there it was burned upon wood with fire. Outside, away from the tent, away from the people. If the whole assembly of Israel sinned without knowing, and the thing became known, the elders laid their hands on the head of a bull for all of them, and it was done the same way. If a ruler sinned, he brought a male goat. If one of the common people sinned, a female goat or a lamb. And the priest made atonement for him, and he was forgiven. And if a man was too poor even for a lamb, he could bring 2 doves, one for a sin offering and one for a burnt offering. And if he could not manage even the birds, then 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour, without oil, without frankincense, for it was a sin offering. And the priest burned a handful, and the man was forgiven. No one was too poor to be made clean. The voice spoke of other faults. A man who heard a public charge to testify, and saw or knew something, and did not speak. He bore his guilt. A man who touched something unclean, a dead animal, and did not notice, and became guilty. A man who swore rashly with his lips, thoughtless, and afterward knew it. In all these, when he became aware of his guilt, he confessed the thing he had done, and brought his offering. And where a man sinned against the holy things of the Lord, or handled another's property falsely, or lied about a deposit, or robbed his neighbor, or found something lost and swore he had not, for these he brought a ram, and he restored what he had taken, and added to it 1/5 part more, giving it back to the one he had wronged on the day of his guilt offering. The blood covered him before the Lord. The silver returned him to his neighbor. Then came the laws laid upon the priests themselves, the ones who lived closest to the fire. The burnt offering was to stay on the hearth of the altar all night until morning, and the fire was to be kept burning, never going out. Each morning the priest put on his linen garments and his linen undergarments, and took up the ashes, then changed his clothes and carried the ashes outside the camp to a clean place. The fire on the altar shall be kept burning, it shall not go out. Day and night, whatever else happened in the camp, the fire lived. The grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the priests were told exactly what was theirs to eat and where, in the holy place, in the court of the tent. For these were most holy, and whatever touched them became holy. But the sin offering whose blood was carried inside the tent to make atonement was not eaten. It was burned entirely with fire. And then the peace offerings again, and the portions. When a man gave thanks, he brought unleavened cakes and cakes of leavened bread with his thank offering, and it was to be eaten the same day it was offered. Nothing left until morning, and what was offered as a vow could be eaten the next day. But whatever remained to the 3rd day was burned. It was unclean, and the man who ate it bore his guilt. No flesh that touched anything unclean could be eaten. It was burned. And again the warning, pressed down hard. Whoever eats the fat of an animal offered by fire shall be cut off from his people. Whoever eats any blood, of bird or beast, shall be cut off. The breast and the right thigh of the peace offerings were given to Aaron and his sons as their portion forever, waved before the Lord, the wave offering and the heave offering, the priests due from the people of Israel, from the day they were anointed throughout their generations. So the words were finished. The law of the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the offering of ordination, and the peace offering, which the Lord commanded Moses on Mount Sinai in the wilderness on the day he commanded the people to bring their offerings to the Lord. Now the words became flesh. The voice had told Moses how it must be done. Now it must be done in front of everyone. Moses took Aaron and his sons, and the garments, and the anointing oil, and the bull of the sin offering, and the 2 rams, and the basket of unleavened bread, and he gathered the whole assembly at the door of the tent. "This is what the Lord has commanded to be done," he said. And he washed Aaron and his sons with water. He put the coat on Aaron, and tied the sash, and clothed him in the robe, and set the ephod upon him, and bound it with its finely woven band. He placed the breastpiece on him, and in the breastpiece he put the Urim and the Thummim. He set the turban on his head, and on the front of the turban the golden plate, the holy crown, as the Lord had commanded. Then Moses took the anointing oil, and anointed the tent and everything in it, and sprinkled the altar 7 times, and anointed the altar and all its tools, the basin and its base, to make them holy. And he poured the anointing oil on Aaron's head, and anointed him, to set him apart. Then he brought Aaron's sons forward, and clothed them in their coats and sashes and caps, as the Lord had commanded. He brought the bull of the sin offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head, and it was killed. And Moses put its blood on the horns of the altar with his finger, purifying the altar, and poured the rest at its base, making atonement for it. He brought the first ram, the burnt offering, and they laid their hands on its head, and it was killed, and its blood thrown against the altar, and it was cut, and washed, and burned whole, a pleasing smell. Then he brought the second ram, the ram of ordination, and they laid their hands on its head, and it was killed, and Moses took some of its blood and put it on the tip of Aaron's right ear, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, and then on his sons, the same, ear and thumb and toe, so that the hearing, the hand's work, and the walking of the ones who would come near God were marked with blood. He took the fat, and the right thigh, and the bread, and put them in Aaron's hands and his sons' hands, and waved them before the Lord, and burned them on the altar. And he took some of the anointing oil, and some of the blood from the altar, and sprinkled it on Aaron and his garments, and his sons and their garments. Then Moses told them, "Stay at the door of the tent 7 days and nights, keeping the charge of the Lord, so that you do not die. For 7 days you shall not go out, until the days of your ordination are complete." And Aaron and his sons did everything the Lord had commanded through Moses. 7 days they waited by the door, while the camp slept and woke and slept again around them, and the fire on the altar did not go out. On the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. "Take a bull calf for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering," he told Aaron. "And tell the people to bring a goat, and a calf, and a lamb, and an ox, and a ram for peace offerings, and a grain offering mixed with oil. For today the Lord will appear to you." They brought what Moses commanded to the front of the tent, and the whole assembly drew near, and stood before the Lord. "This is the thing the Lord commanded you to do," Moses said, "that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." So Aaron went to the altar. He killed the calf of his own sin offering, and his sons brought him the blood, and he dipped his finger and put it on the horns of the altar, and poured the rest at its base. He burned the fat. He offered the burnt offering, and his sons handed him the pieces, and he burned them. He offered the people's sin offering, and their burnt offering, and their grain offering, and the peace offerings, doing each thing as it had been commanded, his hands moving through the blood and the fat and the fire. And then Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them, and came down from making the sin offering, and the burnt offering, and the peace offering. Moses and Aaron went into the tent and came out, and blessed the people. And the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came out from before the Lord, and consumed the burnt offering, and the fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. And then, in the same hour, while the smoke of that fire still rose, 2 of Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his censer, and put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and offered before the Lord a strange fire, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from before the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord meant when he said, 'Among those who come near me I will be treated as holy, and before all the people I will be honored.'" And Aaron held his peace. He said nothing. He stood there and he was silent. Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle, and told them, "Come, carry your brothers away from before the sanctuary, out of the camp." And they came and carried them out by their coats, still in the garments they had died in, outside the camp. And Moses said to Aaron and to his other sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not let your hair hang loose, and do not tear your clothes, lest you die, and wrath come upon all the people. But your brothers, the whole house of Israel, may weep for the burning the Lord has kindled. And do not go out from the door of the tent, or you will die, for the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you." And they did as Moses said. On the day their brothers died, the father and the 2 surviving sons stood at the door and did not mourn, because the oil was on them, and the work was not finished. And the Lord spoke to Aaron directly, "Drink no wine nor strong drink, you nor your sons, when you go into the tent, lest you die. A statute forever, so that you may tell the difference between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, and teach the people of Israel all the statutes the Lord has spoken to them by Moses." That day there was still a matter of the goat of the sin offering, and Moses found it had been burned, not eaten as commanded, and he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar. "Why did you not eat the sin offering in the holy place?" he asked, "since it is most holy?" But Aaron answered him, "Today they offered their sin offering and their burnt offering, and yet this has happened to me. And if I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been good in the eyes of the Lord?" And when Moses heard that, he was content. On the day Aaron buried 2 sons in silence, he could not bring himself to eat, and Moses did not press him. Then the voice returned to the ordinary things of a life lived near holiness. What could enter the body, and what could not? Among the animals of the earth, Israel could eat whatever parted the hoof completely and chewed the cud. But not the camel, which chewed the cud, but did not part the hoof, not the rock badger, not the hare, not the pig, which parted the hoof but did not chew the cud. These were unclean, their flesh not to be eaten, their carcasses not to be touched. Of what lived in the waters, they could eat whatever had fins and scales. But everything in the seas and rivers without fins and scales was detestable, and its flesh was not to be eaten, its carcass to be shunned. Among the birds, a long list was named to be avoided: the eagle and the vulture and the kite, the raven, the ostrich, the hawk and the owl, the pelican and the stork, the heron, the hoopoe, and the bat. Winged insects that went on all fours were detestable, except those with jointed legs above their feet for leaping. Certain locusts and crickets could be eaten. And whoever touched the carcass of an unclean creature was unclean until evening, and had to wash his clothes. If a dead, unclean thing fell into a clay pot, the pot was broken. If on seed to be planted, it stayed clean. If on seed that had been wetted, it was unclean. This was the law, to make a difference between the unclean and the clean, between the living creature that may be eaten and the one that may not. "For I am the Lord your God," the voice said. "You shall be holy, for I am holy." The voice spoke of birth. When a woman bore a son, she was unclean 7 days, and on the 8th day the boy was circumcised. And then she waited 33 days in the blood of her purifying. If she bore a daughter, she was unclean 2 weeks, and waited 66 days. When the days were fulfilled, she brought a lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin offering to the door of the tent. And the priest made atonement for her, and she was clean. And if she could not afford a lamb, she brought 2 birds, one for the burnt offering and one for the sin offering. Again, no woman too poor to be made clean. Then came the disease that emptied a house. When a man had on his skin a swelling or a scab or a bright spot that might be the mark of the spreading plague, he was brought to the priest, and the priest looked. If the hair in the spot had turned white and the sore looked deeper than the skin, it was the leprous disease, and the priest pronounced him unclean. If it was uncertain, the priest shut the man up for 7 days and looked again, and if the spot had not spread, shut him up 7 more and looked once more. The priest looked and looked and looked at the color of the hair, the depth of the sore, whether raw flesh appeared, whether it spread, and by his word the man was clean or unclean. And the one in whom the disease was found bore the mark of it, his clothes torn, his hair loose, his upper lip covered, and he was to cry out, "Unclean, unclean." All the days the disease was in him, he was unclean, and he lived alone, his dwelling outside the camp, beyond the tents, beyond the fires, beyond every voice he knew, calling out his own uncleanness to warn the ones who came near. The same searching eye was turned on cloth and leather. A garment with a greenish or reddish spot of the disease was shut up 7 days, examined, washed, examined again, and if the plague remained, the garment was burned with fire, and there was a way back. When a man with the disease was healed, he was brought to the priest, who went outside the camp to look at him. If he was healed, the priest commanded 2 living clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet yarn, and hyssop. 1 bird was killed over fresh water in a clay pot, and the living bird, with the cedar and scarlet and hyssop, was dipped in the blood, and the man was sprinkled 7 times and pronounced clean. And the living bird was let go into the open field, carrying nothing, flying free. The man washed his clothes, shaved off all his hair, bathed, and came into the camp, but stayed outside his tent 7 days. On the 7th day he shaved everything again, head, beard, eyebrows, all his hair, washed, and was clean. On the 8th day he brought his offerings, and the priest put blood of the guilt offering on the tip of his right ear, the thumb of his right hand, the big toe of his right foot, the same marks the priests themselves had borne, and oil upon the blood, and made atonement, and the man was clean. And if he was poor, he brought less, 1 lamb and 2 birds, and it was enough, and the disease could enter a house. When the owner came and said, "There seems to be something like a plague in my house," the priest ordered the house emptied, then went in and looked at the walls for greenish or reddish spots that seemed to sink into the stone. He shut the house up 7 days, looked again, and if it had spread, the diseased stones were torn out and thrown outside the city to an unclean place, and the walls were scraped, and new stones and plaster put in. If the plague returned even then, the whole house was pulled down, its stones, its timber, all its plaster, and carried outside the city. But if the plague did not return, the house was pronounced clean, and cleansed with the 2 birds and the cedar and scarlet and hyssop, the same as a healed man. Then the voice spoke of the flows of the body, the discharges of a man, the discharges of a woman, the uncleanness that passed to a bed, a seat, a person touched, and the days of waiting, and the washing, and the offering of 2 birds when the flow had ceased, so that the camp would not be defiled by the uncleanness of the people in whose midst the tent stood. Thus you shall keep the people separate from their uncleanness, the voice said, lest they die in their uncleanness by defiling my tent that is among them. And now the book turned toward its center, toward the one day the whole year bent around, and it opened by naming the dead. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, who died when they drew near before the Lord. "Tell your brother Aaron," he said, "not to come at any time he chooses into the holy place inside the veil, before the mercy seat that is on the ark, lest he die. For I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. This is how he shall come: once a year, not in his glorious garments, but in a plain linen coat and linen undergarment with a linen sash and turban, having bathed his body in water. He brought a bull for his own sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering, and from the people 2 male goats for a sin offering, and a ram. He set the 2 goats before the Lord at the door of the tent, and cast lots over them, 1 lot for the Lord, and 1 lot for Azazel, the goat to be sent away. The goat that fell to the Lord he offered as a sin offering. The goat that fell to Azazel was set living before the Lord, to be sent into the wilderness. First, Aaron killed the bull for himself and his own house. He took a censer full of coals from the altar and 2 handfuls of fine incense, and carried them inside the veil, and put the incense on the fire before the Lord, so that the cloud of the incense covered the mercy seat, a screen of smoke between him and the presence, that he would not die. He took the bull's blood and sprinkled it with his finger on the mercy seat and before it 7 times. Then he went out and killed the people's goat and carried its blood inside the veil, and did with it as he had done with the bull's blood, sprinkling it on and before the mercy seat. So he made atonement for the holy place because of the uncleannesses of the people of Israel, and for the tent that dwelt among them in the midst of their uncleanness. No one else was in the tent while he was inside making atonement until he came out. Then he put the blood on the horns of the altar and sprinkled it 7 times, cleansing it. And when he had finished cleansing the holy place, the tent, and the altar, he brought the living goat. He laid both his hands on its head and confessed over it all the sins of the people of Israel, all their transgressions, all their wrongdoing, putting them on the head of the goat, and sent it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man appointed. The goat bore all their sins on itself into a desolate land, and the man let it go in the wilderness. 1 goat killed, its blood carried in before the presence. 1 goat living, driven out alive under the weight of a whole nation's guilt, into a place where no one lived. Aaron came back, took off the linen garments, and left them in the holy place, washed his body, put on his own garments, and offered the burnt offerings, making atonement for himself and the people. The fat of the sin offering he burned, but the bull and the goat of the sin offering, whose blood was carried in to make atonement, were carried outside the camp and burned, their skins and flesh and dung, and the man who burned them washed his clothes and bathed before returning. And this was made a statute forever. In the 7th month, on the 10th day, they were to afflict themselves and do no work, neither the native nor the stranger among them, for on that day atonement was made for them, to cleanse them, that they might be clean before the Lord from all their sins. It was a Sabbath of solemn rest, and the priest anointed in his father's place would do it year after year. Then the voice pressed again on blood. Any Israelite who killed an ox or lamb or goat in the camp or outside it, and did not bring it to the door of the tent to offer to the Lord, would bear blood guilt and be cut off, so that the people would no longer sacrifice to the goat demons they had chased after. And no one, native or stranger, was to eat blood. Whoever did, the Lord would set his face against him and cut him off. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and the Lord had given it upon the altar to make atonement. It is the blood that makes atonement by the life. So no one was to eat blood, and whoever hunted and killed a clean animal or bird was to pour out its blood and cover it with dust, because the life of every creature is its blood. Then came the hard sayings the book would not soften. You shall not do as they do in Egypt where you lived, the voice said, nor as they do in Canaan where I am bringing you. And it named the unions that were forbidden. A man was not to uncover the nakedness of his mother, his father's wife, his sister, his granddaughter, his aunt, his daughter-in-law, his brother's wife, a woman and her daughter together, his wife's sister, as a rival while she lived. He was not to approach a woman in her uncleanness. He was not to lie with his neighbor's wife, defiling himself. He was not to give any of his children to be passed through the fire to Molech, profaning the name of God. He was not to lie with a male, as with a woman, it was detestable. He was not to lie with an animal, nor was a woman to give herself to an animal, it was a perversion. By all these the nations before them had defiled themselves, and the land itself had become unclean, and, the voice said, the land vomited out its inhabitants. Keep my statutes, the voice warned, that the land may not vomit you out, as it vomited the nation before you. For whoever does these detestable things shall be cut off from among their people. And then, in the midst of all the law, the heart of it, speak to all the congregation of Israel, the voice said, and tell them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Honor your mother and father. Keep the Sabbaths. Do not turn to idols or make gods of cast metal. When you reap your harvest, do not reap to the very edges of your field, and do not gather the gleanings. Leave them for the poor and the stranger. Do not steal. Do not deal falsely. Do not lie to one another. Do not swear by my name falsely. Do not oppress your neighbor or rob him. Do not hold back the wages of a hired man overnight. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but fear your God. Do not be unjust in judgment. Do not favor the poor or defer to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Do not go about as a slanderer among your people. Do not stand by while your neighbor's life is in danger. Do not hate your brother in your heart, but reason frankly with him. Do not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord, and more. Keep the animals and the seed and the cloth unmixed. Deal justly with the fruit of new trees. Do not eat anything with its blood. Do not practice divination or fortune-telling. Do not disfigure your bodies for the dead. Do not make your daughter a prostitute. Keep the Sabbaths and revere the sanctuary. Do not turn to mediums or those who consult the dead. Stand up in the presence of the aged and honor the face of the old man. When a stranger lives among you, do not wrong him. Love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Keep honest scales, honest weights, honest measures. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. Then the voice named the punishments, and did not blunt them. Whoever gave his children to Molech was to be put to death, stoned by the people. And if the people looked away, the Lord himself would set his face against that man and his family. Whoever turned to mediums and wizards, the Lord would cut off. Whoever cursed his father or mother was to be put to death. The man who committed adultery with his neighbor's wife, both were to die. The forbidden unions the book had already named were named again with their sentences: death, or being cut off, or bearing their guilt childless. Be holy, the voice repeated, for I, the Lord, am holy, and I have separated you from the peoples to be mine. A man or woman who was a medium was to be stoned. And once more, you shall be holy to me. For I, the Lord, am holy, and I have set you apart from the peoples to be my own. The priests were bound tighter than the rest. A priest was not to make himself unclean for the dead among his people, except for his closest kin, mother, father, son, daughter, brother, unmarried sister. He was not to shave his head or the edges of his beard or cut his body. He was to be holy, for he offered the food of his God. He could not marry a prostitute or a divorced woman, only a virgin of his own people. The high priest, on whose head the anointing oil had been poured, could not let his hair hang loose or tear his garments even for his own father or mother, and could not leave the sanctuary to go to any dead body. And no descendant of Aaron who had a defect, blind, lame, disfigured, with a limb too long or broken, a hunchback, a dwarf, with a defect in his eye, with a blemish, could come near to offer the food of his God. He could eat of the holy food, but he could not approach the altar or the veil. So the sanctuary was not to be profaned. The priests were to keep away from the holy things when they themselves were unclean, on pain of being cut off. Only when they had bathed and the sun had set could they eat. No outsider, no guest of a priest, no hired servant could eat of the holy things, only those born in his house or bought with his money. If a priest's daughter married outside the priesthood, she could no longer eat of them. But if widowed or divorced and returned to her father's house with no child, she could. And the animals brought to the altar had to be without blemish, nothing blind or injured or maimed or with a discharge or scab, nothing with anything defective, for it would not be accepted. A newborn animal stayed with its mother 7 days. From the 8th day it could be offered. And you shall not kill an animal and its young on the same day. Keep my commandments, the voice said, and do them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you, who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. Then the voice laid out the year, its holy days marked like fires along a road. First the Sabbath, 6 days of work, and the 7th a day of solemn rest, a holy assembly in all their dwellings. In the 1st month, at twilight on the 14th day, the Lord's Passover. And on the 15th, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, 7 days of eating bread without leaven, beginning and ending with a holy assembly and no work. When they came into the land and reaped its harvest, they were to bring the first sheaf to the priest, who waved it before the Lord on the day after the Sabbath, with a lamb and a grain offering. And until that day they were to eat none of the new grain. From that day they counted 7 full weeks, 50 days, to the morning after the 7th Sabbath, and brought a new grain offering, 2 loaves of bread baked with leaven, the first fruits, with lambs and a bull and rams, and again a holy assembly and no work. And when they reaped, they were again to leave the gleanings and the corners for the poor and the stranger. In the 7th month, on the 1st day, a day of solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with the blast of trumpets, a holy assembly. On the 10th day of that month, the day of atonement, a holy assembly when they afflicted themselves and did no work at all. Anyone who did not afflict himself would be cut off. Anyone who worked would be destroyed, a Sabbath of solemn rest from evening to evening. And on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Feast of Booths, 7 days to the Lord. On the 1st day, a holy assembly, and on the 8th, a solemn closing assembly. They were to take the fruit of splendid trees, palm branches, leafy boughs, willows of the brook, and rejoice before the Lord 7 days. And they were to live in booths 7 days, every native Israelite in booths, so that their generations would know that the Lord made them live in booths when he brought them out of Egypt. These were the appointed feasts of the Lord, each in its season. Then 2 small commands, and 1 death. The people were to bring pure beaten olive oil for the lamp, that Aaron might tend it from evening to morning, continually, before the Lord. And they were to bake 12 loaves of fine flour, and set them in 2 rows on the pure table before the Lord, with frankincense, every Sabbath. An offering from the people of Israel by covenant forever, and the bread belonged to Aaron and his sons to eat in a holy place. And in the camp there was a man whose mother was an Israelite, and whose father was an Egyptian, and he quarreled with a man of Israel, and in the quarrel he blasphemed the name and cursed. They brought him to Moses and put him in custody until the will of the Lord should be made clear. And the Lord said, "Bring the one who cursed outside the camp, and let all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and let all the congregation stone him." And to the people the voice said, "Whoever curses his God shall bear his sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be put to death. The whole congregation shall stone him, the stranger as well as the native. Whoever kills a man shall be put to death. Whoever kills an animal shall make it good, life for life. And if anyone injures his neighbor, as he has done, it shall be done to him, fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth." And they brought the man outside the camp and stoned him, as the Lord commanded Moses. Then the voice reached far beyond a single year, to the rhythm of the land itself. "When you come into the land I give you," the voice said, "the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and prune your vineyard, and gather the fruit. But the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land. You shall not sow or prune. Whatever grows of itself you shall not reap as an owner, but it shall be food for you and your servants and your hired workers and even the beasts. And you shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7, 49 years, and on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the day of atonement, you shall sound the trumpet throughout the land, and hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee, when each returns to his own property and each to his own family. You shall neither sow nor reap in it, but eat what the field yields on its own. In that year, land that had been sold went back to its family, for the land was never truly sold, only leased until the Jubilee. For the land belongs to the Lord, and the people were strangers and sojourners with him. If a man grew poor and sold part of his property, his nearest kinsman could redeem it. Or if he prospered, he could buy it back himself, and if neither, it returned to him at the Jubilee. A house in a walled city could be redeemed within a year of its sale, but after that, it stayed with the buyer permanently. The houses of the Levites and their pasture lands, though, could always be redeemed and returned at the Jubilee. If your brother becomes poor and cannot support himself, the voice said, you shall help him as you would a stranger or sojourner, and let him live beside you. Do not take interest from him or profit from him, but fear your God. Do not lend him money at interest or sell him food for profit. And if he grows so poor that he sells himself to you, do not make him serve as a slave, treat him as a hired worker, and in the Jubilee he and his children go free and return to their family. For they are the Lord's servants, whom he brought out of Egypt, and they shall not be sold as slaves. A poor man sold to a foreigner living among them kept the right of redemption by his kin, at a fair price counted to the Jubilee. For the people of Israel are the Lord's servants. I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And then the voice set before them the 2 roads, and walked down both. If you follow my statutes and keep my commandments, the voice said, I will give you rains in their season, and the land shall yield its crops, and the trees their fruit. Your threshing shall last to the vintage, and the vintage to the sowing. You shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in safety. I will give peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. I will remove harmful beasts, and the sword shall not go through your land. You shall chase your enemies, and 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 put 10,000 to flight. I will turn to you and make you fruitful and multiply you, and confirm my covenant. You shall still be eating last year's harvest when you must clear it out for the new. I will make my dwelling among you, and I will not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, that you should no longer be slaves. I have broken the bars of your yoke and made you walk with heads held high. But if you will not listen, the voice went on, and will not do all these commandments, and if you spurn my statutes and break my covenant, then I will bring terror on you, wasting disease and fever that consume the eyes and drain the life. You will sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you, and you shall be struck down before your foes, and those who hate you shall rule over you, and you shall flee when no one pursues. And if after all this you still will not listen, I will discipline you 7-fold for your sins. I will break your proud strength, and make your sky like iron and your ground like bronze, so your strength is spent for nothing, for the land shall not yield and the trees shall not bear. And if you walk contrary to me still, I will bring more blows 7-fold. I will send wild beasts among you that will rob you of your children and destroy your livestock and make your roads empty. And if that does not turn you, I will bring the sword to avenge the covenant. And when you gather into your cities, I will send plague among you, and you shall be given into the hand of the enemy. When I break your supply of bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven and dole it out by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. And if even then you will not listen, but walk contrary to me in fury, I will walk contrary to you in fury, and discipline you sevenfold, and you shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters. I will destroy your high places and heap your dead bodies on the bodies of your idols. I will lay your cities waste and make your sanctuaries desolate, and I will not smell the pleasing aroma of your offerings. I will devastate the land, so that your enemies who settle in it shall be appalled. I will scatter you among the nations and draw the sword after you, and your land shall lie desolate, and your cities waste. Then the land shall enjoy its Sabbaths, all the days it lies desolate, while you are in the land of your enemies. The rest it did not have while you lived on it. As for those who remain, I will send faintness into their hearts, so that the sound of a driven leaf shall put them to flight, and they shall flee as though from the sword, and fall when no one pursues. They shall stumble over one another, and there shall be no power to stand before their enemies. You shall perish among the nations, and the land of your enemies shall devour you, and those who are left shall waste away in their iniquity in the enemies' lands. But even there, the voice did not close the door. If they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers, and their hearts are humbled, and they make amends, then the voice said, I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. For all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not spurn them or destroy them utterly, or break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. I will remember the covenant with their forefathers, whom I brought out of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. These are the statutes and rules and laws the Lord made between himself and the people of Israel through Moses on Mount Sinai. And then, last of all, the voice spoke of vows, of what a man might promise to give. When a man made a special vow of persons to the Lord, they were valued. So much for a man, so much for a woman, so much for the young, so much for the old. And if he was too poor to pay, the priest set a value he could bear. An animal vowed could not be exchanged, good for bad or bad for good. If it was, both became holy. An unclean animal was valued by the priest and could be redeemed by adding a fifth. A house dedicated was valued and could be redeemed by adding a fifth. A field dedicated was valued by the seed it took and the years to the Jubilee, and could be redeemed by adding a fifth. But if it was not redeemed or was sold to another, it became holy at the Jubilee, given over to the priests. The firstborn of clean animals already belonged to the Lord and could not be vowed. An unclean firstborn could be redeemed or sold at its value, plus a fifth. But nothing devoted, nothing set apart under the ban, man or animal or field, could be sold or redeemed. Every devoted thing was most holy to the Lord, and a person devoted under the ban was to be put to death. And every tithe of the land of seed or fruit was the Lord's, holy to him. If a man redeemed part of his tithe, he added a fifth. And every 10th animal that passed under the shepherd's rod was holy to the Lord, and could not be chosen for good or bad or exchanged. These are the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses for the people of Israel on Mount Sinai. And the voice, which had begun by calling one man's name out of a cloud too thick to enter, fell silent. The tent still stood at the center of the camp. The fire on the altar still burned, and the people who had asked at the mountain for the voice to stop now knew what it meant to live beside it, that to come near the holy was never a small thing, never a safe thing, that it had cost blood and cost lives, and that even so, a way had been opened and marked and kept, so that an unclean people could go on living beside the fire and not be consumed.